Commander Kreek stood before the polished chrome podium, his 6 eyes scanning the rows of young alien cadets who sat in perfect formation within the Academy's grand amphitheater. The walls of Zephyria Prime's most prestigious military college gleamed with holographic displays showing star maps, battle formations, and tactical maneuvers. These fresh-faced recruits, with their pristine uniforms and eager expressions, had no idea what they were about to hear. "Welcome, future cannon fodder, I meant distinguished officers," Kreek began, his voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that only comes from surviving too many battles. His scarred carapace caught the artificial light as he adjusted his numerous service medals. "Today we're going to discuss what your instructors politely call the human problem. I prefer to call it how I learned to stop worrying and fear breakfast food." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the audience. Kreek's reputation preceded him: 15 campaigns, 12 different species defeated, 4 star systems conquered. He was the kind of commander other commanders whispered about in strategy rooms. But there was something different about him now, something that made even veteran officers uncomfortable. "Now, before we begin this delightful little horror story," Kreek continued, pacing across the stage with the measured steps of a predator, "let me establish my credentials. I've fought the crystalline warriors of Vega Prime, whose bodies could withstand plasma fire. I've outmaneuvered the hive minds of the Sector 9 Nebula, beings who could think in perfect unison. I've even survived 3 separate encounters with the notorious death cults of the Outer Rim." He paused dramatically, letting his words sink in. "I have conquered worlds, gentlemen. I have reduced entire civilizations to footnotes in history books. My tactical brilliance has been studied in war colleges across 17 galaxies." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "And then I met the humans." The amphitheater fell silent. Even the environmental systems seemed to hush in anticipation. "Oh yes, recruits. Today you're going to learn why the most advanced military minds in the galaxy wake up in cold sweats, muttering about creatures who use kitchen utensils as weapons of mass destruction." Kreek activated the holographic display behind him, showing a peaceful blue-green world orbiting a yellow star. Meridian 7. A lovely little agricultural colony, population roughly 50,000 humans. Our intelligence reports indicated they possessed minimal defensive capabilities, no orbital platforms, no energy shields, no standing army, just farmers, shopkeepers, and the occasional local militia armed with projectile weapons that belonged in a museum. He gestured dismissively at the peaceful scene. "Command assigned me 3 battle cruisers and a full invasion force." Honestly, I was insulted. It was like using a plasma cannon to swat a fly. But orders are orders, and I was told to make an example of this pathetic little settlement. The display shifted to show massive alien warships approaching the planet. We began our standard intimidation protocol. Atmospheric entry, low-altitude flyovers, the usual psychological warfare techniques that make primitive species soil themselves and surrender immediately. But these humans... Kreek's voice took on a tone of incredulous disbelief. These humans had the audacity to fire back at us with antique kinetic weapons. A few cadets chuckled nervously. Kreek's expression grew darker. So naturally, we decided to teach them proper respect. I ordered a full ground assault on their primary settlement. My troops landed expecting to face cowering farmers begging for mercy. Instead, we found ourselves confronting. He paused, his voice dropping to an almost embarrassed whisper. Commander Jake Martinez and his breakfast brigade. The holographic display now showed a stocky human male with graying hair and determined eyes, standing in what appeared to be a town square filled with makeshift barricades. Martinez was their local security chief, essentially a glorified traffic controller, and he had no formal military training, no advanced weapons, no tactical support. What he did have was a hardware store, a diner, and apparently the kind of deranged creativity that only comes from a species that hasn't had the common sense to go extinct yet. Kreek began pacing again, his movements becoming more agitated. My first wave of shock troops encountered barricades made from overturned dining tables and coffee shop chairs. Amusing, right? We prepared to blast through these pathetic obstacles with our plasma rifles. Confident in our technological superiority, that's when Martinez and his volunteers opened fire with. He stopped, closing his eyes as if the memory caused physical pain. With modified kitchen appliances. The holographic display showed the bizarre battle scene, humans wielding frying pans that had been retrofitted with some kind of electromagnetic coils, coffee makers that shot pressurized steam, and toasters that somehow launched projectiles. They turned breakfast equipment into weapons of war. My soldiers were being pelted with superheated pancake batter from modified griddles. Martinez himself was wielding a cast-iron skillet that had been electrified and was using it to deflect our energy weapons back at us. One cadet raised a tentacle tentatively. "But sir, surely your superior training and equipment." "Superior training?" Crix's voice rose to a near shout. "Tell me, recruit, what chapter in the tactical manual covers defending against weaponized breakfast food? Where in our combat protocols does it explain how to counter a coordinated attack involving flying coffee mugs and explosive maple syrup?" The display showed alien soldiers in full combat armor fleeing from humans armed with kitchen utensils, their formation completely broken. They used a commercial espresso machine as a flamethrower. They turned a walk-in freezer into a fortress. Martinez coordinated his entire defensive strategy using the diner's intercom system, calling out orders between serving coffee to his volunteers. Crix's voice cracked with frustration. And the worst part, they were winning. He turned to face the cadets directly. My highly trained, technologically superior invasion force was being systematically defeated by a small-town breakfast crew. We retreated in complete humiliation, our ship's sensors still detecting the smell of bacon and the sound of Martinez's laughter echoing through our communication systems. The room was dead silent. Several cadets looked distinctly uncomfortable. And that, gentlemen, was my introduction to human military tactics. Welcome to your nightmares. Crix allowed the uncomfortable silence to stretch for several moments before continuing. Now, you might think that after the Meridian 7 incident, High Command would have taken the human threat more seriously. You would be wrong. Instead, they promoted me and assigned me to lead the Saturn campaign, what they called a proper fleet engagement against human naval forces. The holographic display shifted to show the magnificent rings of Saturn glittering with ice particles and rocky debris. Beautiful, isn't it? Saturn's rings, one of the most strategically valuable positions in the Sol system. Control the rings, control the shipping lanes to the outer colonies. Simple military logic. We brought our finest battle fleet, 47 ships of the line, including 2 dreadnoughts and the flagship Eternal Dominion. The cadet near the front row shifted nervously. "What did the humans bring to oppose you, sir?" Crix's laugh was bitter and hollow. 18 ships. 18. Most of them cobbled together from civilian transports, cargo haulers, and what they generously called destroyers but looked more like flying scrap yards. Their flagship was commanded by Admiral Lisa Hartwell, a woman who, according to our intelligence reports, she had spent most of her career managing supply convoys. The display now showed the human fleet, mismatched vessels of various sizes and designs, clearly patched together from different technologies. They looked absolutely pathetic compared to the sleek, uniform alien warships. I remember thinking this would be over in minutes. A supply convoy manager against the conqueror of the vegan hegemony? Please. I ordered standard battle formation, a beautiful textbook approach that had served me well against 12 different species. My ships moved into perfect attack position, weapons charged, targeting systems locked. Crix's expression grew increasingly agitated. That's when Hartwell did something that violated every known principle of naval warfare. She ordered her entire fleet to turn around and fly backwards. Several cadets exchanged confused glances. One brave soul raised a manipulator. "Backwards, sir." "Backwards. Rear engines forward, main thrusters pointing directly at my fleet." I thought they were retreating, finally showing some sense. But no, oh no! They were repositioning for the most insane tactical maneuver I've ever witnessed. The holographic display began showing the battle, with human ships flying stern first toward the alien formation. Hartwell's voice came crackling over our communication intercepts. All ships, execute barbecue protocol. Barbecue protocol. What kind of military designation is that? I soon found out. Those backwards flying ships suddenly engaged their main engines at full power, turning their exhaust plumes into massive flame weapons. Crix's voice rose with frustrated disbelief. They were using their own propulsion systems as directed energy weapons. The superheated plasma from their engines was melting through our forward shields like they were made of tissue paper. My beautiful battle formation was being cooked alive by exhaust fumes. The display showed alien ships reeling back from streams of engine fire, their formations breaking apart in confusion. But that was just the beginning of their madness. While my fleet was trying to adapt to this exhaust-based assault, Hartwell ordered what she called Operation Asteroid Bowling. Her ships began using Saturn's ring debris as projectiles, scooping up chunks of ice and rock with modified cargo holds and launching them at us using their navigation thrusters. A cadet in the back row looked incredulous. They were throwing space rocks at your warships? Not throwing, coordinating. Each human ship became a mobile artillery platform, calculating trajectory, velocity, and impact angles with the kind of precision that should have been impossible for their primitive computers. They turned the entire ring system into their personal ammunition depot. Crix's pacing became more frantic. And then Hartwell ordered ramming attacks. Not suicide charges, coordinated ramming attacks where her ships would accelerate toward ours, fire their weapons at point-blank range, but then use emergency thrusters to veer away at the last possible second, except half the time. They didn't veer away. The display showed human ships deliberately colliding with alien vessels, causing massive explosions. They were playing chicken with dreadnoughts. Their pilots were laughing, actually laughing, as they crashed their ships into ours. One human captain, just before ramming our command cruiser, broadcast on all frequencies, "Hey, alien jerks, catch this," and then detonated his ship's reactor core inside our hangar bay. Several cadets looked physically ill. Crix noticed their expressions and nodded grimly. The worst part? It was working. Perfectly. Hartwell's illogical tactics were systematically dismantling my fleet. We lost 23 ships to their 18, 23, including both dreadnoughts and 3 heavy cruisers. He stopped pacing and stared directly at the cadets. We retreated. Again, from a supply convoy manager and her collection of flying junk heaps. The official report called it tactical repositioning due to unforeseen asteroid field complications. But I knew the truth. His voice dropped to a whisper. The humans had taken everything we thought we knew about space combat and thrown it out the airlock, along with our dignity. Crix paused to take a sip from his hydration unit, his hands trembling slightly. You'd think after 2 humiliating defeats, I would have learned something about human unpredictability. You'd think wrong. 6 months later, High Command decided to test human ground forces with a direct assault on their military installation on Europa. The holographic display shifted to show Jupiter's ice-covered moon, with a sprawling fortified complex nestled in a valley between frozen ridges. Fort Harmony, ridiculous name for a military base, but perfectly human. Intelligence indicated it housed approximately 2,000 troops and served as their primary training facility for Arctic warfare. Our mission was simple: capture the base, interrogate the personnel, demonstrate the futility of human resistance. A cadet raised a tentacle. How many troops did you deploy, Commander? 5,000 of our finest shock troops, supported by atmospheric fighters and heavy artillery. The textbook ground assault against an isolated target with no hope of reinforcement. Crix's expression darkened. What we didn't know was that Fort Harmony was commanded by Sergeant Tommy Ricci, a man who had apparently lost his mind completely. The display showed a compact, muscular human with tattoos covering both arms and a grin that looked slightly unhinged. The assault began at dawn. Our forces descended from orbit in perfect formation, landed in designated zones, and began the systematic advance toward the fortress. Standard operating procedure. That's when the music started. Several cadets looked confused. Music, sir? Music. At volumes that registered on our seismic equipment. The entire fortress erupted with what humans call classic rock, a primitive but surprisingly effective form of auditory warfare. Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Queen, names that still make my antennae twitch involuntarily. T-Rex began pacing again, his agitation increasing. The sound was deafening, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the human defenders were using the music to coordinate their attacks. Different songs meant different tactical maneuvers. When Thunderstruck played, their artillery opened fire. When We Will Rock You started, their infantry charged our positions. The holographic display showed the chaotic battle scene, alien troops trying to advance while massive speakers blasted music across the frozen landscape, human soldiers moving in perfect synchronization with the beat. Ritchie himself was leading cavalry charges, yes, cavalry charges, while humming along to something called Fortunate Son. He was using a modified plasma rifle in one hand and conducting his troops like an orchestra conductor with the other. The man was completely insane. The cadet in the middle row looked bewildered. But surely your superior training allowed you to adapt to this musical warfare? Crix's laugh was bitter and sharp. Adapt? You? How do you adapt to enemies who change their entire tactical approach every 3 minutes and 27 seconds? That's the average length of a human song, by the way. I know because I've had to study their accursed music library. His voice rose to near hysteria. When war pigs played, they used guerrilla tactics and hit-and-run attacks. When Another One Bites the Dust started, they focused on picking off our officers with sniper fire. And when that infernal song Don't Stop Believin' came on, they somehow managed to break through our defensive lines with nothing but raw determination and terrible singing. The display showed alien forces in complete disarray, unable to predict or counter the rhythm-based human tactics. But the absolute worst moment came when Ritchie's forces were surrounded and outnumbered 3-1. Any rational military commander would have surrendered. Instead, he ordered his troops to play something called the Final Countdown at maximum volume and led a charge directly through our center line while air guitaring to the solo. Crix stopped pacing and faced the cadets directly, his multiple eyes wide with remembered horror. They were playing air instruments while shooting at us, making guitar sounds with their mouths while throwing grenades. It was the most terrifying display of coordinated madness I've ever witnessed. Several cadets looked genuinely disturbed. One asked quietly, "What happened to your forces, Commander?" We retreated. Again. But this time the humans followed us all the way to our landing zone, playing victory songs and singing along at the top of their lungs. "We are the champions" will haunt my dreams until the day I molt my final shell. Crix's voice became barely audible. To this day I cannot hear rhythmic sounds without expecting human soldiers to come charging over the horizon. My personal quarters are soundproofed, and I sleep with acoustic dampeners, because somewhere in the back of my mind, I can still hear Tommy Ritchie humming Smoke on the Water while reloading his weapon. The commander took another long drink from his hydration unit, his expression growing even more haunted. But the absolute worst encounter, the one that nearly broke my sanity completely, happened during the siege of New Geneva on Titan. This time, Command assured me, we had the humans trapped. No escape routes, no reinforcements, no possibility of their usual tactical insanity. The holographic display showed a domed human settlement surrounded by alien forces, clearly outnumbered and outgunned. We had them completely surrounded for 3 weeks. Standard siege protocol: cut off supplies, wait for starvation and desperation to force surrender. The settlement was commanded by Captain Rachel Wong, a logistics officer with 0 combat experience, perfect target for breaking human morale once and for all. A cadet leaned forward. "This sounds more manageable than your previous encounters, sir." Crix's laugh was hollow and bitter. "Manageable? You naive little grub. This became the most psychologically devastating defeat of my entire career. Because instead of begging for mercy or launching desperate attacks, the humans did something that still makes military strategists across the galaxy question their life choices. He gestured at the display, which now showed supply shuttles leaving the besieged human settlement. They started bringing us food. The silence in the amphitheater was deafening. Several cadets looked confused, unsure they had heard correctly. Food, medical supplies, entertainment packages. On the fourth day of the siege, Captain Wong herself walked out under a flag of truce, pushing a cart loaded with fresh baked bread, soup containers, and what she called care packages for the troops. Creaks's voice took on an incredulous tone. She set up a field kitchen right in the middle of no man's land and started serving meals to my soldiers. Hot meals. With seasoning. She asked about dietary restrictions and food allergies. My shock troops were standing in line for homemade cookies like it was some kind of social gathering. The display showed the surreal scene, armored alien soldiers sitting around makeshift tables, sharing meals with their supposed enemies. And while she was feeding my troops, Wong was talking to them. Not interrogating, talking. About their families, their home worlds, their hopes and dreams. She learned their names, remembered their stories, treated them like people instead of soldiers. A cadet raised a tentacle nervously. Surely your troops maintained their discipline. Creaks's voice cracked. By the end of the first week, half my force was volunteering for kitchen duty. They were helping her cook, sharing recipes from their home planets. My communications officer spent an entire afternoon teaching her how to make traditional Zephyrian battle bread. The commander's pacing became erratic, his movements betraying deep emotional distress. Wong weaponized compassion. She turned basic decency into a tactical advantage. Every day, more of my soldiers would find excuses to visit her kitchen. They started questioning orders, asking why we were fighting people who just wanted to share a meal and conversation. His voice dropped to an anguished whisper. The siege ended when my own troops mutinied, and not violently. They just stopped fighting. They couldn't bring themselves to attack people who had treated them with genuine kindness. Half my force formally requested transfer to human service. The other half submitted resignations from military duty entirely. Creax stopped pacing and stared directly at the cadets, his multiple eyes reflecting pain and confusion. Captain Wong defeated an entire siege force with nothing but hot soup and basic human decency. She turned my soldiers against me without firing a single shot, breaking hearts instead of bones. He shook his head slowly. How do you fight an enemy that makes you question why you're fighting in the first place? How do you conquer people who respond to aggression with invitation to dinner? The amphitheater fell into complete silence. Creax stood motionless for a long moment, his shoulders sagging as if under an enormous weight. When he spoke again, his voice had lost all traces of sarcasm and dark humor. What remained was raw, naked fear. Listen to me very carefully, cadets. Everything I've told you, the jokes, the sarcasm, the theatrical horror stories, it's all been a defense mechanism. It was a way to cope with a truth so terrifying that most commanders refuse to acknowledge it. He turned to face them directly, his multiple eyes reflecting genuine terror. Humans aren't just lucky. They aren't just weird or unpredictable or amusingly primitive. They are the single most dangerous species this galaxy has ever produced. Several cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The change in Creax's demeanor was unsettling, like watching a comedian suddenly break character to deliver a funeral eulogy. In the past 50 cycles, 7 major galactic empires have fallen to human expansion. 7. The Crystalline Hegemony, the Vorthan Republic, the United Sectors Alliance, all gone. Not conquered in the traditional sense, but absorbed, converted, changed into something unrecognizable. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The humans don't just defeat you militarily. They defeat you philosophically. They make you want to join them. They turn your greatest strengths into weaknesses and your certainties into questions. They weaponize everything, including their own weakness and kindness. Crix's hands were visibly trembling now. Every species that has encountered them extensively has been fundamentally altered by the experience. Some have joined human civilization willingly. Others have retreated to the far edges of known space, afraid to make contact again. A few have simply disappeared. He looked each cadet in the eye, one by one. What terrifies me most isn't their tactical unpredictability or their technological adaptability. It's that after fighting them for years, part of me actually likes them, respects them, even cares about them. His voice broke slightly. That's how they win, cadets. They make you forget why you wanted to fight them in the first place. The silence stretched for nearly a full minute before a cadet in the front row raised a shaking tentacle. Commander, what do we do? How do we prepare for them? Another voice called out from the back. Are they still expanding? Are they coming here? More questions erupted across the amphitheater. What's their current military strength? Have they made contact with the High Council? Is there any way to negotiate with them? Kriex held up his hands for silence, and the room gradually quieted. His expression was grim, resigned. Preparation? You want to know how to prepare? Study everything. Assume nothing. Expect the impossible and plan for the absurd. Because the moment you think you understand human behavior, they'll do something that makes your previous assumptions look like the naive fantasies of a newly hatched grub. He walked slowly back to the podium, his movements those of a being carrying an unbearable burden. As for their expansion, last intelligence reports put human colonies in over 300 systems. They're not just spreading, they're accelerating. And every species they encounter either joins them or learns to stay very, very far away. The holographic display flickered to show a star map with expanding red markers indicating human presence. The growth pattern was unmistakably aggressive and systematic. My advice to you, future officers? If you encounter humans in your careers, remember everything I've told you. But more importantly, remember this, they're not monsters. They're not evil. They're just, he paused, searching for the right words. They're just human. And somehow, that's the most terrifying thing of all. Kriex straightened his uniform and adjusted his medals one final time, forcing a weak smile that didn't reach his eyes. Class dismissed. Try not to have nightmares about breakfast food and dinner invitations. I hear it gives you wrinkles. But as the cadets filed out in stunned silence, everyone could see that his hands were still trembling.